Guys, today we're going to be talking about whether or not the Dark Ages were really dark. So the Dark Ages is a time period after the fall of Rome. This becomes known as the Dark Ages because it essentially is talking about this is the period of decline for Europe. It falls in the middle of those two important time periods, Greece and Rome, and the European Renaissance. And we'll be talking about the European Renaissance a little bit later. I want to kind of unpack this question, were the Dark Ages really dark, so that we know what we're actually answering here. When we're talking about something being dark, we're really talking about a time before religion. We're talking about the time before Enlightenment, kind of those times of education and thinking, along with Aristotle and Socrates and some of those other like academic people. And so when we're really talking about darkness, we're talking about people being uneducated. We're talking about people focusing very heavily on religion rather than thinking. And so we really start really talking about a time period in which learning was not supported. There was very little cultural advancements. So a lot of it was, for example, we don't see a lot of art during this time period that kind of goes outside of the religious realms. There's not a lot of architectural achievements. There's no central government. There's a bad economy. It's essentially a miserable place to live. When we think about darkness, those are the kind of things that we're thinking about. So in this document activity, we're really going to look at whether or not this time period was really dark. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to do is read two different textbook excerpts, really looking at like kind of two different points of view about this time period. So I'm going to read the textbook, and as I go, I'm going to annotate it for you. You can kind of see what we're looking at here. During the early Middle Ages, much of Europe passed through a time of turmoil and confusion. Turmoil and confusion would kind of indicate here that we're looking at a time period in which it is dark. There's unhappiness around. Of ignorance and lawlessness, again, that would kind of indicate that whole idea here of it being dark. The early Middle Ages may be justly called the Dark Ages. So this textbook entry is really going to be explaining why the Dark Ages are considered dark, and will kind of serve as the basis for that definition of dark. During the early Middle Ages, from 476 to about 1100, European civilization slipped back into semi-barbarianism. So barbarism, is essentially lawlessness, this idea that people are uncivilized in their nature. It's very violent. A barbarian is somebody who is very violent in their kind of interactions with other people. The chief cause of this decline was a lack of government which could keep order. So that's, again, another part of this definition of it being dark, is this idea that there is no ability for the government to kind of keep control. The Germanic kingdoms, which had been set up by 476, were unable to suppress violence. Again, that's that barbarism that we talked about before. There were so many highway robbers that travel became dangerous. So essentially, we're setting up here again that the Dark Ages are a dangerous time period. Europe suffered in a decline in commerce and manufacturing, in education, in literature and the arts, and in almost all things that make a high civilization possible. So what we're really saying here is that the Dark Ages were dark because it didn't have any of the things that make a civilization great, like literature, education, and things of that nature. Cities grew smaller and in some cases practically disappeared, and Western Europe became a region of poverty-stricken farming communities each virtually isolated from the rest of the world. So that kind of supports that idea of feudalism like we've talked about with the Middle Ages. So this definition, according to this textbook, this definition of dark is turmoil, confusion, ignorance, lack of learning, lack of literature, lack of arts, lack of economic activity, and isolation. Okay, so we're going to move on to textbook B at this point. From 1000 to 1300, the economy of Europe developed and prospered. So this is completely opposite from what textbook A said. This is kind of setting up that definition of what light is. So this would be setting up that kind of opposite perspective that the Dark Ages were not truly dark. Available farmland tripled and the food supply increased notably, bringing up the population. So essentially during this time period, they're saying that the population increased a whole lot, and that was really good. Europeans resettled lands that had been depopulated by the 9th and 10th century invasions. Again, those invasions they're talking about are those Germanic tribes that kind of moved in and really caused the fall of the Roman Empire. Also opened new lands for farming. Again, we're talking here about this idea of feudalism, okay? Open new lands for farming. They're talking about the feudal economy, that the feudal economy was not such a bad thing. Technological improvements like the heavy plow, the shoulder collar for horses, metal horseshoes, and more efficient water and windmills contributed to the jump in food supply. Between 500 and 1300, Europe's population grew from 25 million to more than 70 million. So according to this, we're really trying to say that there are technological improvements that lead to the increase in economic activity, and that the population growth is an indicator here that this is not a dark time. People are still happy. They're still reproducing, which kind of shows that they are happy with their life. Okay. The next document we're going to look at is document A. So after we've gone through the textbooks, we now kind of have this baseline definition for what dark really means. Okay, so as we're reading through these documents, we're either talking about a dark ages that has turmoil, confusion, ignorance, lawlessness, declining commerce, declining education, lack of government, or we're talking about a time period in which the economy is doing well, they're having technological improvements, and the population is growing. So those are kind of the things that we're looking for in these documents when we're looking to understand the spread and whether or not these dark ages were truly dark. So as always, with the top of each document, we're going to read the background information in italics first before we move into the actual document. The following document is from the yearly records of the Abbey of Xanten, a city in modern-day Germany. An abbey is a place where Catholic monks and nuns live. The document describes Europe's troubles in the mid-9th century. It focuses on invasions by heathens or non-Christian barbarian tribes. Specifically, it mentions the Vikings or Northmen and Saracens, Arab tribes. Most of the names mentioned are cities or areas in Germany. Gaul is basically modern-day France, and Christendom is the Christian part of Europe. So these are kind of things we already knew about the Middle Ages, that they were very heavy into Catholicism and religion, that we had these Germanic tribes invading non-Christians. They do eventually become Christian as a result of the spread of Catholicism. The Vikings, we know, are coming down from Sweden, and the Saracens are kind of attacking from the Middle East area. Okay, so as we're reading, we're looking for whether or not Dark Ages were truly dark. In 845, twice in Worms, I know it says worms, but it's actually pronounced Worms because it's French, there was an earthquake. In the same year, the heathen broke in upon the Christians at many points, but more than 12,000 of them died. Another party of invaders devastated Gaul, and more than 600 of them died. Okay, so first thing I notice is that there's an earthquake. So natural disasters are going to cause a time period of disruption and chaos, just like they mentioned in textbook A. Okay, so I'll underline that there. The one that I really want to pay attention to is these second two paragraphs. The heathen broke in upon the Christian at many points. So those invasions are happening, which we know is going to cause a break in their ability to defend themselves, and it's going to cause 12,000 of them to die. So when we're looking at that particularly, that's going to cause a major issue. Another party of invaders devastated Gaul. So when we're looking at this one here, that again, those invasions are creating a bigger issue. More than 600 of them die, which is going to be a big problem for them. Okay. According to 846, according to their custom, the Northmen, we know that this means the Vikings, plundered eastern and western Frisia and burned down the town of Dordrecht with 2 other villages before the eyes of the emperor. So again, the emperor didn't have enough power to stop those invasions from occurring, and so that would have caused the Dark Ages to be pretty dark. They didn't have enough control, they didn't have enough power, and so that caused that issue. He was in the castle of Nimwegen, but could not punish the crime. So again, lack of government control there. Okay. The Northmen returned to their own country with many men and goods. So this kind of shows here that the Europeans were not able to defend themselves against attack, and so they were plundered and invaded, which kind of caused their economy to go down. I mean, imagine somebody coming to your house and robbing you. At the same time, the Saracens killed all the Christians who they found outside the walls of Rome. So the Saracens, if you remember, are the Arabs. It is implied there, based on their background, that they would be Muslim. So this is really where we're starting to see like the precursor to the Crusades here. They also carried men and women away prisoners. Their crimes from day to day bring sorrow to Christians. So Christians in Europe specifically, which is where we're kind of talking about whether these dark ages were truly dark, are kind of considered a sad time for them. 849, the heathen from the north caused trouble in Christendom as usual. So again, we're talking about the Vikings here, and grew as usual and grew greater in strength, but it is revolting to say more of this matter. 853, a great famine in Saxony, so that many were forced to live on horse meat. I mean, gosh, that sounds awful. Like, can you imagine having to like eat horse meat because you don't have enough food, right? So again, heathen from the north here causing trouble in Christendom. They're being attacked day to day. So one of the main reasons why the Dark Ages were considered truly dark is because of those invasions, the lack of power, as we talked about up here, of the emperor to stop those invasions. All the death that's kind of occurring. This particular document would really try back up the idea that the Dark Ages were truly dark. Okay, we'll do one more document and then we're going to break into a second video so I can finish these off without having to have too much here. Okay. Again, we're going to read the background information. The excerpts below come from different laws of the 8th and early 9th century, defining the worth of currency, regulating the exchange of currency, and establishing penalties for people breaking these laws. The first two come from what is today part of modern France, and the third from what is now part of Germany. So these are laws that medieval Europe kind of put in place specifically about the economy, which is one of the reasons, if you remember from the first textbooks, kind of talking about whether or not the Dark Ages were really dark was related to their economy. Okay? So the very first one here is from Aix-la-Chapelle, which is in France, on the value of commodities. So commodities are goods that are necessary to live. Be it noted how much the solidi, or the unit of currency, of the Saxons ought to be worth. It should be worth a young ox. 1 solidus should also be worth 40 bushels of oats and 15 bushels of rye. For those who live near to us, 1 solidi should be worth half a sigla of honey. For people who live in the north, 1 solidi should be worth 2 sigla of honey. So from this we can understand here that people who are living in the north, their economy is not doing as well. Because their 1 solidi is worth 2 sigla of honey. Okay, so people who live in the north are being attacked by the Vikings, like they talked about in the previous paragraph, and so we can kind of understand here that that's not going super well. So there is a difference between the north and the south here, which is also showing kind of inconsistencies in the economy. Okay. The second one here, concerning false money, we have ordered that he who has been proved to have made it shall have his hand cut off. And he who does not obey this, if he is free, shall pay 60 solidi. If he be serf, let him have 60 lashes. So remember, the serfs are those people who are working the land. They're the ones that are tied to the land and forced to be there. I think the fact that they had this law would show that the economy wasn't going very well. It's also a very harsh law. To have your hand cut off as a result of your crime is very kind of a big problem. Okay. Last one here is in Frankfurt. Okay, Frankfurt is also in France. In all places, in all states, and in all markets, the new denarii shall be exchanged as money and be received by all. If anyone refuses to negotiate a purchase or a sale, they can bring the case before the king. So here we're talking about purchases and sales and the king. Remember, in the feudalism, the king is the top power, okay, just like a lord here. They're the ones that are kind of deciding civil cases like this one. They can do this only if they are a free man, but if they are servile and they own a business, let them lose the business or be stripped and publicly beaten in the presence of people. So this is a pretty harsh crime here. So you essentially are going to be publicly beaten as a result of the crime that you're committing, okay? However, if he refuses the money to purchase or sale because he's ordered, then the master shall pay 15 solidi. So this kind of shows here